Sarah London, a former Division I tennis player at Harvard, she went on to become the youngest woman to lead a Fortune 500 company. Now, as CEO of Centene, she's steering the $100 billion healthcare giant in what she calls an incredibly challenging year for the industry, as policy shifts and cost pressures reshape the American healthcare system. A CNBC changemaker, Sarah London is in the Changemakers and Power Players spotlight.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. You were named to our inaugural 2024 CNBC Changemakers list for your role leading Centene, which you've been CEO of since 2022. It's a thrill to have you on this podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I was honored to be part of the inaugural class.
So what I think is so interesting about your career is you were the youngest when you were named CEO of Centene, you were the youngest Fortune 500 CEO who was a woman named to that role. So huge role running this massive healthcare company at a very young age. But what people may not know about you is that you were a Division I tennis player. And it seems to me like there's this huge correlation between sports and success in business, particularly for women. So much data about this. And I would be curious to go back to what happened before your career and your career as a tennis player, to hear a little bit about how that experience, being such a competitive tennis player, impacted your approach to leadership. How much do you think tennis shaped who you are as a leader?
I definitely think being an athlete is such a huge part of who I am and sort of my identity. And there are a number of different components of that experience that I think have been incredibly helpful. I mean, first and foremost, I'm incredibly competitive, and that never stops. That is like an innate thing. And so having a way to channel that, obviously, when I was younger through sports, that, and sort of hone that competitive framework and the process of, not just winning and wanting to win and hating to lose, but also like the process of losing and failing as part of getting better. And I think that, that has been a big piece of one of the things I say is that this job in particular has probably gone the farthest in terms of like beating the perfectionism out of me, because it is so big and complicated and there is no such thing as perfect. And that actually, it's ironic because I actually wish I'd had a little bit more of what I know now back when I was an athlete and had embraced the failure even more, because it is about, how you get better. But it's also, teamwork, right? And like this idea that you are, you're on the court, you're in that moment, but you're part of a team, you're part of sort of a bigger goal and endeavor, and what it means to have extreme accountability in your individual role, but also be part of trying to make sure that everybody around you is also getting the support they need and achieving what you want to as a broader team. And I think that is another direct connection, is that, the CEO job is, if done well, you should get all of the blame and none of the credit, because the credit is really your team and the people that you have around you who are doing an incredible amount of work every day.
Yeah, there's so much in that answer. I'm thinking about the research that I cited in my book about how the real value of sports to female leaders is not necessarily just being part of the team, but the real value is actually the failure and the frequent experience with failure, and the fact that failing forces you to re-examine what you did, how you could do differently, what was in your control, what was out of your control. Before we get to the teamwork part, I want to dig in more to the fact that tennis is an individual sport. Yes, you're part of a team, but talk to me about how that idea of discipline and strategy is something that you learned at a very young age. And it sounds like was sort of inherent to who you are, but also really trained.
Yes, there is an incremental intensity, I think, which is not to take anything away from team sports. But it is a different, like you are alone on the court. Now, I love to play doubles because I like to have at least one other person to like be figuring stuff out with. But it's like it is you on the court by yourself trying to figure out the puzzle that's in front of you, who the competitor is, what's the dynamic, what do you have to do, what do you have to do better. And I do think that it is probably why I kind of love the intensity of those challenges where like you are staring at a problem and you have to figure it out. And it drives a very singular accountability because you win or lose on the court. Yes, some of it is what is the opponent or the challenge that you have faced in that moment, but it's like, how did you rise to the occasion? And it's really all about whether you got there or not.
I like to think about people having leadership superpowers. What do you think yours is? Is it that competitiveness? Is it the fact that you love to take on these challenges?
I don't know if it's a superpower. I do think I'm sort of fatally attracted to impossible problems. I think I would hope. I like to think that my superpower is actually listening, which is actually connected to what we're talking about. And it's the idea that when you're facing really hard questions, when you're facing like the 49% calls, which are really the decisions that end up or should end up, on the CEO's desk, because everything else, the team is tackling, you have to try to take in all the data. You have to listen to the different perspectives. You have to try to solve the puzzle. And that can't just be, oh, I think I know the answer, right? It has to be, okay, what are the people I really deeply trust telling me? What is my instinct telling me? And so that like asking questions and listening in order to gather the data to try to make the best possible decisions, at least is the thing that I think has served me best in navigating probably the most challenging situations.
So if the competitiveness and this drive were inherent to who you are as a person and as a leader, is the listening something that you learned over time? Or is that something that you were naturally good at as well? Or is that something that has to be learned?
Well, I think my parents would probably tell you I wasn't very good at listening naturally. But I was a middle child, right? So you're like always, I don't know, it's sort of always taking in the data around you and trying to learn. There's a certain like, I don't know, it's an interesting mix of like both being very, I think being competitive is not, it's not, for some people being competitive is like needing to be the smartest person in the room and needing to have the right like be the one that has the right answer. For me, the competition has always been about the winning. Like, what is the definition of winning? And so in any given scenario, winning should be the best possible answer, not necessarily me having the answer. And so I think it sort of developed out of that idea of like what's the bigger win and how do you get to the bigger win? And a lot of times, especially as you're coming up in your career, like more often than not, most of the time, you don't have the most information, you don't have the answer. And I've always been, in roles that were, newer to me and challenges, and you're sort of always want to be learning, but that means you always have to be learning. You have to be asking questions and figuring out what's the data I need to get to the right answer for where we need to go.
So the right answer, not necessarily my answer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
It's interesting because thinking about tennis being an individual sport, but also what you're saying about listening to your team. And I'm wondering if for you, there was a transition from thinking of yourself as like an individual player who was part of your team to actually like being the team leader and really mobilizing the team. I mean, was that a tough transition for you as an individual athlete to being a leader of lots of people?
So the truth is, I don't actually think I was a very good tennis player. I mean, I did well, but the intensity of that individual piece, like I loved having other people. That's why I really loved playing doubles, because I loved having a thought partner. I loved having like the dynamic that comes with being on a team. And very early in my career, I was in roles where I was lucky because I got to be part of very high functioning teams. Ironically, most of the people that I worked with, most of the women I worked with were all team sport elite athletes. And that dynamic of like being able to figure it out together and win as a team, like very quickly kind of became primary versus the intensity. Like for me, the experience as an individual athlete has led to very, very, very high individual accountability in terms of delivering the piece that is mine to deliver. But I much prefer winning as a team and being on a team.
What were those experiences that helped, were sort of your formative team experiences?
So very early, so one of my first jobs in healthcare and first jobs, well, maybe not first jobs out of college, but sort of the path to where I am now was being part of a data and analytics startup that was focused on really the horizon of digitization of healthcare data and understanding, being able to like fundamentally understand the landscape differently. And that team, that was a startup, and everybody on that team, when I joined the company, which was probably only about 100 people at that time, every single person on that team had worked with somebody else on the team before. And so there was this incredibly high degree of, yes, expertise, but also trust. And that bond of like, we are trying to build something together, and there's such a high degree of trust that you can have open debate and disagreement because you're really trying to wrestle again to the best possible decision. And then just those experiences that you have in a startup, like we had this thing called the Thanksgiving Massacre, which was like we needed to deliver a whole new piece of software to a client the first week in December, and like the entire company worked the entire Thanksgiving weekend. Everybody took like 2 hours off to go have Thanksgiving dinner with their families, and then we were right back online. And like just the bonding that creates, and again, the trust and the idea that everybody's bringing the same level of accountability, that is just magic. Like if you can build that culture, and that's the culture that, we're building on at Centene, you can build that culture of like very high trust, high talent, high accountability, just magical stuff can happen.
Yeah. When I think about what has distinguished you as a leader, obviously was the fact that you became a Fortune 500 CEO at such a young age, but also you have this reputation for incredible transparency. And you do these videos for your team, for your employees, which is pretty unusual. What is your big picture approach to transparency, and where did these videos come from?
The transparency thing is like anyone would tell you like I should never play poker. I can't not. And I think it's important because again, the strength of this organization and the complexity of what we're trying to accomplish is that both of those things are so great. You have to have people on the journey. They have to know where we're going. They have to know why. And you've got to create the communication, frankly, bidirectionally. And so wanting to make sure that I had a chance to connect with the employee base on a very regular basis and share, again, sort of where are we going, the storytelling of that, but also the why, and not just what are we trying to change, but what are we trying to change to? And what should that look like? But there's also I have a very regular cadence of meeting with our team members, and not, obviously I have my team, but like meeting with folks who are earlier in their career or, more broadly distributed across the organization to just get candid feedback about what's working, what's not, what are we not seeing, what's not bubbling up, how could we be thinking about things differently? And that feels really important to me to kind of keep a pulse on, is where we're going, is that resonating? Is it really landing the right way with the folks who are going to have to do most of the heavy lifting? And then just what are ways that we can be doing better? Because I've never done this job before. I've now done it for 4 years, but like I've never, right? Every day is a new day. And so I don't pretend that I'm doing it perfectly. And I'm always looking for feedback.
And so what made you decide to start, as CEO, to start having this kind of communication and this kind of transparency? Was there any pushback internally where people were like, why is she doing this? How did that go?
I think it was it was a little bit of sort of building on having, as soon as I stepped into the role, like we started bringing the whole organization together, a couple of times a year to have all employee town halls. And again, really just talk to folks about where we were going, and through multiple lenses, really trying to help them hear the logic and meet senior leaders and get to know them better. And then that evolved into, I think the seeing the opportunity for a more regular cadence. And frankly, as we went through 2025, which was an incredibly challenging year for our industry and a very challenging year for Centene, the need to and intense desire to tell our team members what we knew as soon as we knew it, and really bring them on the journey as well. And so it's just been this sort of building drumbeat. And I think it's been well received. And we always ask for feedback about, who else do you want to hear from? Who else can, I bring on our sort of podcasts. We'll go through earnings. Our CFO, Drew, will join me, and we'll talk through kind of what was the investor response. We've had our head of culture come in and talk about all of the good work that we've been doing over the last couple of years to kind of rewrite what Centene's culture looks like and how that is going to work going forward. So it's still evolving, but I really don't think there's too much communication that you can do.
What have you learned about communication and transparency in the past 4 years of being CEO of Centene that you would want to share with people who are not necessarily other CEOs, but just anyone who's trying to be a better leader within their own universe? Whether it's a better employee or a better partner, what is your advice about communication?
I do think it's really easy to fall into like I know this stuff and so everybody must know this, right? Or I understand something and therefore everybody must equally understand it. And also I don't know if people really want to hear from me. And I think, it is, especially when you're trying to drive change, it is really, really important to revisit messages and to go like a click deeper on not just what we are doing, but why we are doing it. And also, what we need from the team in terms of making these things successful. I also really prefer, and obviously you can't do it all the time, but I really don't like just talking at the organization. It's really important to me to, as much as possible, sort of be in a dialogue, because there are really good questions that people have about not just what does this mean for me, but how do I carry the message forward, or what about X, Y, and Z? And those are all learning opportunities. But the storytelling is a really, really, and I don't say that lightly, right? Like you can, you're telling stories. No, like painting the vision, painting the where we're going and why. And I learned this when I was at that startup in a chief product officer role.
Was this Optum?
This was, Humedica that we were then acquired by Optum. But that vision is actually a really powerful organizing force. Like it carries the gravity of like almost an orbiting planet, right? It's like we're a moon, we're going to the moon, right? And like there's a gravitational pull to that, that if you give that to people and you give enough detail, then if you're off in the middle of a negotiation with a vendor and you're trying to figure out like which way to go, like you've got touchstones about, wait a minute, I know this is what we're trying to accomplish, right? Like I know at Centene, like we are not just focused on growth like we have been in the past. Like we want to deliver industry leading outcomes at an industry leading cost structure. So how do I look at this problem in front of me through that lens? So long-winded way of saying, I don't actually think you can over communicate. And I think it's important to make sure that the communication as much as possible is in all directions.
You just alluded to the fact that that Centene is a mission-driven company. And it sounds like going back decades, the beginning of your career, you've been mission-driven in terms of data and healthcare and outcomes. How do you think about making sure that your mission is clear, not just for yourself, but also within the environment in this incredibly challenging time?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I fundamentally think that Centene is a different organization, and I would like to take credit for that, but I can't. It is part of how special the company was as it was built, and it is really a testament to the reason that the 60,000 people who work in the organization came to Centene, myself included. Like the level of focus on impact and the mission as a sort of guiding force is innate in the company. And I think it has allowed us to navigate not just sort of the turnaround that we've been executing operationally, but the layers of challenges that we've faced from, relative to like a changing policy landscape and obviously just the dynamics of this last year in particular. And so making sure that, one, we acknowledge that, we honor that, we reinforce that internally. And then to your point, also making sure that that is part of how we show up in the market and how we show up for our customers, and thinking about, yes, how do we honor the contracts that we have and serve as a partner to state and federal governments, and make sure that our members have the support that they need and the access to care. But how do we also leverage the size and scale of the organization to help make the system smarter? How do we bring forward data to say, as you're considering policy decisions, here are things that we can empower you with, because we see a landscape across 30 states and how Medicaid programs are running and what's effective and what's not. And where do we have providers who are doing incredible work that we can actually scale? Like, how do you lean into the power that we have, given size, scale, and experience, to advance the mission? Because the cool thing about Centene is that, like, when you deliver on the mission, you are also delivering margin. Because if you deliver better outcomes for communities at a lower cost, you are saving taxpayer dollars and you're increasing the health equity and the health asset of that community. And so there isn't that like moral hazard, which allows us, I think, to lean into both things equally.
Yeah, there's been so much attention on the fact that the American healthcare system is about the volume of care. So it's like running the tests, getting paid for the execution of the care as opposed to the outcomes. When you think about your background in data and this outcome-driven care, how are you embracing AI or just even thinking about the power of technology to evolve your business?
I think it's very exciting. And I get really excited about the really unsexy part of it, which is that there are billions, probably close to trillions at this point, of dollars that are being spent in the health and in around the healthcare system, that are just wasted because we are operating still a very manual, fragmented, analog system in a lot of ways. And so just the idea that, that we could run the entire back end of our business digitally in an automated fashion with the goal of zero human intervention and, driving to high degree of speed and accuracy in stuff like paying claims, right? Like we're not getting into care decisions. We're talking about just driving down the cost of administering the system that we have built. I think there is huge opportunity there, and that is a major focus of this organization over the next couple of years, because I think we're finally at a point where the technology is inflected and there's enough digital data and it's organized that you can run hard at some of those things. What that should lead to eventually is all of these other use cases that are going to be a little bit more complicated, and figuring out how to make sure that you always have a human in the loop when you need to, that you always have a clinician in the loop when you need to. But the reality is that we have increasingly, we have a consumer base that is going to demand agency, right? Like I self-diagnose on ChatGPT, and like I'm willing to make that decision and take that risk. The idea that we would, we can't force that risk onto others at this moment, but like increasingly you are going to have, AI and digitally native consumers who are used to being able to ingest data, process, leverage whatever expertise they look to and make decisions. And it's what happened, frankly, in financial services. In the 90s and 2000s, you've got to a place where people were managing an E-Trade portfolio because they could make their own decisions with data. That is the journey ahead. And there are, challenges in that, but that is where the industry should be going. And it will solve fundamental problems that we have today around things like access to care for underserved populations and shortages of, behavioral health or even just like primary care, resources in rural communities. Like there's so many bridges that we can build. And I'm not like an AI hypist, but when you just look at the pieces that are in place, like we should be able to fundamentally change the cost structure of healthcare and then invest those dollars in a completely different front-end experience.
So AI is a democratizing force for healthcare.
100%.
Yeah. So you're talking about all these changes that technology could bring, the positive opportunities, but you've also referenced this really fraught time in the healthcare industry for so many different reasons. How do you, as a CEO, make long-term investments and do long-term planning when there is so much near-term volatility?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard in the face of the challenges, but you have to take a long-term view. I think especially right now. Now, you can't be you can't be sort of insensitive to the realities, and you have to explain the why, right? Like why is the work that Centene is going to undertake over the next couple of years so critical and so fundamental to, frankly, what our members and our customers and our investors should want us to be doing. And we have to be held accountable for that, right? We have to be able to describe those milestones and show that those investments are delivering on the value that we believe that they should. But it's very easy to get caught in the short term. And I think it's really important to sort of push back on that. It's really important to have a leadership team and a board that is thinking longer term. But you also have to same thing as change internally. Like you have to bring people on that journey and explain the why, because it's not orthogonal to what everybody should want. It's just a question of, what's happening today versus long-term success in a moment where the world is fundamentally changing.
And I guess given all of that, how do you personally handle it? Your job is really hard. It's really stressful. How do you stay focused and not get distracted by maybe what's noise, maybe what's not noise?
I think, well, ironically, it goes back to sort of the beginning of the conversation that being an athlete who was also a total nerd, like I had this natural balance in my life of, the thing that I was supposed to be doing that was my job when I was younger, which was going to school and, achieving all the things I was supposed to do. And I had this other pursuit that was sort of equally challenging. And for me, it was really critical to have balance. And so making sure that I have ways to constructively sort of step out of, like when I started in this role, it was like that accountability reflex kicked in, and I barely saw my kids for the first 9 months, and I was just all day, every day. And you do burn out, and it's not actually helpful, because the way that you step back and you get perspective and you figure out what's the stuff to listen to and what not is by literally stepping back sometimes. And so I will not say that I'm perfect at it, but I still very much try to sort of create that balance in my life. And, my family naturally does that. They are, at the end of the day, my kiddos are the most important thing, and they're an important touchstone. They also keep me really humble. The first time I was on one of these women's most powerful lists or whatever, my then 8-year-old was like, I mean, you're 22nd. If you were a first baseman, no one would even draft you if you were 22nd. And I'm like, okay, great. So perspective and balance, and really good mentorship and, thought partners I have board members who are wonderful at helping me, keep perspective, and other CEOs that I talk to who just let you sort of step out of the moment sometimes, can be really important.
I want to hear about the mentorship and also about the balance. We talk about life hacks on this podcast, but I want to go back to the burnout, because there's a lot of talk about burnout in our culture, and for everyone it's different. And I think for a lot of hard driving people, it's hard to even identify when they're suffering from burnout. And I think for a long time, people didn't think burnout was even a thing, or that you could, or there was any negative implications of working too hard. I certainly feel like I was raised that way. What was burnout for you, and what did you do about it?
Ultimately, it manifests as sort of just the depletion of energy. And again, it's interesting that to your point that there's some question of whether burnout's a thing. So not to sort of go back to it, but there's no question for athletes that burnout is a thing, right? Because I had kids that I grew up playing tennis with that by the time they were 15, they had tennis elbow, they had surgeries, they literally physically couldn't do the same thing over and over and over again and have it not take a toll. And professional athletes will tell you that, you have to take entire days off. I think Carlos Alcaraz, before the finals of the US Open last year, went and played golf. He didn't even hit the day before. He's like, I just need to go be somewhere else. And so that level, anything that you are doing in sort of a single lane in a repetitive way, to me, there's no question that at some point, your body, your mind, your spirit will just sort of it needs a break.
So when did you realize, when did you hit burnout? Was it, you said 9 months in?
Yeah, I think the level of stress and just sort of I'm going to get up at 4:00 every morning, and I had binders like this that I was reading, and I stopped making time to work out, and work sort of took every precedent over everything else, including my family. And I got to a point where I realized it wasn't actually making me better at my job. And I drove my kids. It was probably, again, yeah, it was probably like almost a year in. I drove my kids to school one morning, and I realized it was the first time I had driven them to school all year, right? It was like I was getting like one in for the calendar year at the very end. And they were asking me about work. And, one of them said, what's going on? You seem really stressed, which was the first clue that like my kids pay attention and they see that, right? So it's like, I think I'm just handling it, but like it spills over. And I was explaining, I've got a really hard decision that I need to make, and it's not really clear, which way to go. And from the back seat, my kid was like, well, sounds like you should just choose one and see how it goes. And I was like, yeah. Like,
From
it
the
is
mouths of
actually
babes.
that easy sometimes. So, figuring out how to get a little bit more perspective and a little more balance and a little more humor into all of it all, it kind of came back to me.
Yeah. And so do you have any mentors? You mentioned mentors. Did you have any mentors you went to during this period who helped you figure out how to attain that kind of balance that you have now?
Yeah, I have. So CEOs, including the CEO who I worked for at Humedica, I started calling him to ask questions about, different things. But this idea that it was interesting to me because like there is actually very little difference between running a 100-person company or 1,000-person company and a 60,000-person company in terms of just like first principles of some of this stuff. And I also got an executive coach who equally sort of helped me make sure that I'm checking my own balance in terms of the things that I know I have to do in order to be in shape to show up for the job and the challenge every day. And a lot of it is like making sure I'm working out every day and like getting enough sleep. I mean, it's basic stuff, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, you've talked about your kids. I do think I have 2 boys, and I feel like they keep you honest. Yeah, they keep you honest. How old are your kids now?
10 and 12.
10 and 12. Yeah, mine
So
are.
they still like me.
Yeah, 11 and 14. Mine still like me for now. What is your support system at home? And how do you make sure you're focused when you're with them and not stressed about work, as your kid said?
Well, I'm very lucky in that when I stepped into this role, my husband stepped back and is a full-time dad and is amazing at it. And I think, everybody needs a support system, and what that looks like, it can be different for everybody. But it was important for me to feel like, my kids were getting sort of that intensity of support that I knew I was not going to be able to give them every single day. But it's, I've always believed that there's not like work-life balance is this like mushy thing. And I always joke that like, back in the day when we were learning how to write essays in like 5th grade, they talked about like the block method versus the shuttle method. And I'm like, work-life balance is the shuttle, right? It's like you're here and you're there, and it's like in the middle of everything. And at least for me, again, everybody's a little bit different. So I don't have a hard line. And I actually think that probably means that there are times when I need to do a better job of like dividing the world, but it also means that my kids like very much know what I'm doing. They know that my job is hard. They know that it demands a lot. And my hope is that they're seeing that that's not only like a good thing, but that I actually love my job. And so that is something that they can have too. But it is, it's a balance. I would like to say I come home and like turn off work. But when you come home and you sit down at the dinner table and your 12-year-old's like, what happened today, Mom? The stock went down. Like, There is no escaping.
But I think it
They
is
hold
really
you accountable.
they hold you accountable, but I think it's so good to I mean, I talk to my kids about what I do all the time. I make them listen to podcasts and watch segments and episodes of what I've done because I do think there's something about if I'm not going to be with them all the time, I want them to understand why. And for
Totally.
you, you're communicating your purpose. You have a big job. I think it's so good to talk to them about it. At least this is what I tell myself when we talk about my stories at the dinner table.
I completely agree. And my father traveled a ton for work and was, gone a lot. And what I digested from that one was like, when he was there, it really mattered. And he was there when it really mattered. But he loved his job. It's not something he ever said out loud. It was just like, you knew that. And what it felt like to have somebody who wasn't just working hard, but like loved what they were doing, like it actually brings such positive energy. And so I completely agree that like the subtle or even like the more, obvious lesson about that and saying like, this is what I do. I love doing it. And I want you to understand that. I do think that it leaves a fingerprint because it did for me.
Yeah, and we all want our kids to love what they do as well. So I want to talk a little bit about life hacks. You have an executive coach, you have some mentors, you have a support system at home. Do you have any unexpected life hacks to get you through the day or the week? I interviewed Chelsea Hershorn, who said she has this giant calendar for the year. CEO of Frida, and she has a calendar on the wall that's like a giant calendar she plans out for the year. Anything like that you do to keep yourself sane? I know. I thought it was pretty cool. Sounds like you're good about sleep. Do you have wearables? Do you have an Aura ring?
No, which is funny because everybody's like, you're such a data geek. I can't believe you don't have this. And I'm like, sometimes there's too much data. Like, yeah. I know I have to get 7 hours of sleep or like, you don't want to be around me. And I stay sort of pretty disciplined about that. Like my big, like the biggest thing for me is, reading is like a huge outlet for me. And so my general, like, there's like direct correlation between how high the stack of good books I have to read, squeezed into free time is versus like mental wellness. So
fiction or
that's
nonfiction?
A big one. Oh, fiction, all well written, not to brag about fiction. I love mysteries and romance novels. I admitted that to the whole company in our first town hall. Someone was like, are there, what like biographies in leadership have you read? And I was like, well, I feel like most of the lessons I've taken about leadership, I take from watching, like just seeing good and bad in action. And then I went on to say, mostly when I read trashy novels. And then I was like, wow, I just admitted that to the whole company. Okay.
Well, you said transparency was really important to you.
It's like, whatever, that's who I am. But I don't know. The life hack that I'm digging at the moment is, on Sunday nights, they make a huge batch of pancake batter and I put it in the fridge so that I can make waffles for my kids when I'm home before they go to school, which takes like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But I feel like, oh my God, I made them like a homemade breakfast and I'm like I'm crushing it on the mom front. And it's like a little thing that I feel like I can do for them in the moment that I'm going to definitely see them that day. So that's the one I'm the most proud of currently.
That's a really good one. I actually made pancakes on Sunday and I made extra pancakes and I put half of them in the fridge and they had them on Monday. But I feel like that was kind of cheating. I was just talking to the CEO of MIDI Health and she was saying that, she has these guilty pleasures and like it's okay to drink Diet Cokes. And I was saying like I try to avoid it. Do you have guilty pleasures? I feel like in the healthcare space, you must be surrounded by all this data about what's healthy and what's not healthy. You're getting your sleep and your exercise, but do you have any guilty pleasures other than your romance novels?
Other than romance novels, no. I mean, again, I'm always sort of a believer in like balance and sort of everything in moderation. Like I try to be gluten-free except when there's pizza around. It's like, so I don't know if I have anything. I don't know if I would call it sort of a guilty pleasure on the eating front, but
because it's more about balance. Well, that's a great note to end on, and I hope you have a great stack of books by your bed and time to read them is the other thing.
Yeah, there's not as much of that, but I tend to read when I'm on the treadmill. So I try to like double up on like the thing I don't really
Are you doing
wanna
audiobook
do.
or are you reading on
No, I'm paper. I gotta hold it. So like on the elliptical or the treadmill, I'm the nerd that's reading at the gym.
Impressive.
But,
Impressive. Well, transparent, mission driven, and also hugely efficient. It sounds like with your reading and your exercise. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today about your leadership of Centene and all these other great takeaways.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was great.